Hello, I'm Joan Capurro. It is my great pleasure to host this segment of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame show. Since 1987, the Hall of Fame has inducted over 125 Marin women of distinction. Women who have made immense contributions to the county of Marin and its residents, as well as to the world beyond. Honorees have distinguished themselves in many fields: education, science, business, philanthropy, the arts, politics, law, philosophy, and religion. Our honorees have been astronauts, filmmakers, world travelers, senators, innovators in science, business entrepreneurs, religious leaders, doctors, musicians, architects, and teachers. Whatever the particular field of endeavor, each honoree has been a force for positive change in our community. And it is a great privilege to acknowledge and document their contributions. Today it's my pleasure to introduce Joan Brown, who is being honored in the class of 2014 for her work in volunteer leadership as the founder of Civic Center Volunteers. Welcome, Joan.
Thank you, Joan.
So glad to have you here. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and you just tell the truth and nothing but the truth. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and the people who influenced you the most, and why.
Okay. My father was a congregational minister, and I grew up primarily in the Midwest in a suburb of Chicago. And all of the people in my life were involved in community service or the church, and probably the greatest influence was my mom. She had a profound interest in psychology and helping people. So in addition to her responsibilities as the minister's wife,
yes,
which was a full-time job in those days, back in the 50s and 60s, she did a lot of personal outreach to people who were in difficult circumstances or dealing with grief or tragic illness or, really, really tough things. So that was kind of the dinner table conversation in our family, is what was going on with the people in our community and what we could do to help.
No wonder you have great philosophy with people, because I know what you've done in the community with volunteers. So That's where it comes from. Good. Glad to know that.
Thank you.
You graduated from Northwestern University in 1964, got married the next day, and that wasn't from high school, thank goodness, that was college. You lived in Stanford housing for a year while your husband finished his BA, and you had your first experience as a teacher. Pretty typical life choices for a woman in the mid-60s. But quickly you took on a less than typical role as a volunteer activist. Now, we already see some of the reasons that you're like that from your mom, but tell us how you started in this path, say, politically and mentors.
Sure. After my husband finished his MBA at Stanford, we took the summer off. It was the end of my first year of teaching, and we figured that this would be our last long vacation, and we spent a month behind the Iron Curtain. Oh. And yeah, and it was the height of the Cold War. My parents thought we were crazy.
Yeah, I see.
But it was actually, it was a life-changing experience for me. We were, at that time, you had to have an interest person with you at all times. And we knew that we were being followed and everything we said and done was being watched and so on. And we were 23 and 4, and our interest guide in then Leningrad was 25, and she spoke 5 languages. And she had come up to our hotel room, and she was saying, what has your country done in the last 25 years, and what have we done? And we said that one of our objections to communism was the closing of the borders, and in particular the Berlin Wall.
Right.
And she said, the Berlin Wall does not exist. It's part of your propaganda machinery. And I said, I've been there, I have pictures, would you like to see them? And she got up and left the room. And it was a defining experience in my life because I experienced what it would be like to live in a totalitarian society where you didn't have freedom, where information was so controlled. TV wasn't getting into Russia then, and it really made me think that if you don't fight for your democracy, you can lose it.
That's right.
So that was kind of the philosophical
Pretty
part.
shocking.
It was.
Yeah.
It was a life-defining moment. And then, I guess then how did this translate to real life? And how it translated was, all politics are local.
Right.
And a friend of ours was running for city council in Los Altos. We lived on the peninsula then, and I worked on that campaign. And then when I was pregnant with my son, there was a proposal for 500 acres of hills across from our home that the largest shopping center developer in the United States wanted to flatten the hills, add a freeway on-ramp, and make the largest shopping center in the continental United States.
What year was this?
1969.
Oh my gosh.
And the land was owned by the Archdiocese of San Francisco. And I was alarmed. I didn't want my kid being raised under mercury lights and so on. And I was young enough and energetic enough and believed if you worked hard enough, you could accomplish almost anything. And we decided to fight it. And most of our neighbors said, you can't fight the Catholic Church, you can't fight the shopping center, it can't happen.
You can fight anything.
Well, and that's what we found out. And I spent then the next, and I was also, because I was pregnant, I was going to be leaving my teaching full time. So I was going to have more time to work in the community. And over a period of several years, we in fact were successful in getting the shopping center stopped. And we realized that it is really important to find positive alternatives for landowners to be fairly compensated for their land, and there need to be ways for the community greater good. And so that then started a 2-year campaign that I ran out of the guest bedroom of the house to form the Mid-Peninsula Regional Park and Open Space District, which was voted in 1972, and the same process was happening here in Marin at the same time.
I'm going to guess that because you were a young pregnant woman, it helped. How can you not believe it? Young mom. That's a fabulous story.
Well,
And you're right, Marin was having
Yeah.
a problem too.
and the benefit of all deep involvement
Right.
is tremendous friendships
Yes.
and mentors are developed. And Lois Hogle, who was a giant in the Peninsula Conservation Movement, became very close family friends. And actually, Lois became my West Coast mom. And interestingly, Lois and my mom were born on the same year, 2 days apart.
Oh,
And
good
they
training.
liked each other a lot.
That is fabulous.
Yeah.
I wonder, that park that's still there, right, in Los Altos?
Yes, and that piece of land, which was going to be flattened for a shopping center, is now one of the most popular regions down on the peninsula. It's the Rancho San Antonio Park.
They ought to have a statue of you in that park. a pregnant
No.
statue. That's a fabulous story. I didn't know about that. That's great. Well, then you moved to Marin in 1975 because you'd cleaned up Los Altos. And you continued to volunteer and be an activist. So tell us why and how you got involved in, for instance, Barbara Boxer's campaign as Marin County Supervisor.
Okay, well, when we moved to Marin,
Right.
I started substitute teaching. My son was then just starting kindergarten. And I was really burned out from these just nonstop, tremendous efforts that I'd been engaged in for 5 years nonstop. I mean, because one campaign led to another, to running a city council campaign, to da-da-da-da-da. And I really needed a break. But after about 6 months, I realized that I was getting bored and that I wanted to get where the juice was. So I picked up my good old Smith Corona portable typewriter and walked into the Barbara Boxer campaign headquarters.
Love it.
And I had met Barbara at a coffee that someone in the community had, and I thought, well, I really want to, she was an environmentalist and had, philosophically, we were very closely aligned. And I was, I had experience in running campaigns on the peninsula. So I walked in with my typewriter, and I guess they thought that I was motivated, and soon I volunteered to serve on the PR campaign committee for her. And there were 7 of us on the committee, and everyone was asked to come back in 2 weeks with what their plan was for Barbara's campaign. And interestingly, I was the only person who came back with a complete plan. I had the slogan, I figured out how many ads of what size, and yada da da da. And because I was the only one who had done my homework,
When you were experienced.
they adopted my plan. So
That's great.
I think it's a wonderful example that if you make a commitment to do something, you do it.
Plan. That's exactly right.
You just do it.
I'm surprised that you didn't run for supervisor because you've got a lot of experience in politics.
I love being an advocate, and I would have no interest at all in elected office. What those people go through is just...
It's thankless.
They work so hard, and it's so tough.
Well, Barbara Boxer has come so far.
Yes.
I mean, and you're still close with Barbara, I'm sure.
Well,
or you communicate. I mean,
yeah.
Christmas
we
card.
communicate. Well, what was cool was when she got first elected to Congress.
Right.
I went back for her swearing in, and in the private office of Tip O'Neill, she introduced me to Tip O'Neill and said, "This is the person most responsible for my being here because she ran the campaign the first time I got elected to public office." Well, she'd never said that to me, so I was quite thrilled.
You're lucky he didn't tap you for some work. That was funny. That was a great story. One of your major accomplishments was the founding of the Civic Center Volunteers Program. That's huge, and I want you to talk about that financial side of it and how many people and how did that program come about and what were some of the highlights and challenges in establishing that? 'Cause you're famous for it.
Well, thank you.
It made a huge difference.
I am so blessed to have had that career for more than 32 years. It came about after Prop 13, when the property taxes were being capped. And actually Mona Versi, who was active in taxpayer things, suggested to the board that they needed to have some volunteers. And the department heads were saying, we're going to have to cut this and this and this. And actually Barbara was on the board at that time, and she was the one who really encouraged the rest of the board to fund a 3-month half-time position to do a pilot program to see if anyone would volunteer for local government. And it was right at the beginning of the Women's Live movement. It was at a time when people were fiercely anti-government because the Jarvis-Gann proposition had just passed and people wanted the government out of their pockets and out of their lives. And it seemed like it would be a pretty risky thing to do. And I didn't think I wanted the job, but I had flubbed a job interview about 3 or 4 months before. And so I went into a job interview not having interviewed in 15 years and didn't prepare for the interview. That was good. And wasn't offered the job. So I interviewed for the Civic Center just to practice the interview skills because I thought, man, I'm really rusty. I need to get this figured out. And obviously I did a ton of preparation, and eventually they offered me the job. So
was Barbara Boxer one of the interviewers, or who
no,
it
was actually Dick Gerhardt, who was the head of, it was then personnel. We didn't have human resources then. We had personnel departments. So that was the beginning. And the challenges were that the first strike ever that the county was going to be engaged in was only weeks away. And there were all kinds of rumors that the supervisors wanted to start the volunteer program to keep the building open during the strike. And I knew that if we didn't honor the strike, that we would be out of business. And in fact, the vast majority of the jobs that the volunteers do are in support of line staff. And so that's what we did. So what seemed like initially a terrible obstacle turned out to be a wonderful opportunity because we could demonstrate that our volunteers would honor the picket lines and that we were in support of line staff. The other challenge at the beginning was there had been no needs assessment, and they'd never had a volunteer program at the county.
Right.
And people would say, well, volunteers aren't going to be dependable, or yada, yada,
I remember that crazy talk.
Yeah. So my friends were saying, Joan, I don't want a volunteer job, I want a real job. So that was my marketing research. It was right as Women Live was getting going. And so I talked to the departments and sent out a memo and said this was going to be professional volunteerism. There'd be job descriptions, there'd be signed contracts, evaluation. They could choose. I would do the pre-screening. They could interview and select or not select a candidate. And
they went along with that?
Beg your pardon?
They went along with that?
Well, we got a request for 100 potential jobs with that initial call. So we narrowed it down to 25 and spread them across the departments. And then Paul Libator, bless his heart, and the IJ ran an article that said 25 jobs available at Civic Center, for volunteers.
He's wonderful.
He is.
Paul's wonderful.
The IJ has been very, very supportive of the Civic Center Volunteers program and getting our word out. I'm very, very grateful to them. So within 3 days, I had 55 calls on those 25 jobs. So that's an unheard of response. And in the initial article, I boldly said that this is ideal for reentry women who will have a chance to increase their confidence, update their resumes, get letters of recommendation and re-enter the job market.
Absolutely right.
And what's interesting is that the program has really reflected the demographics and the changes in the community and in the economy. So in 1979, when we started the program, it was women's lib, and then when we had the first economic downturn in the 80s, I suddenly was getting a lot of people who were out of work, who were going nuts because they weren't feeling productive, and who wanted to be busy and productive, and people who were using the volunteer program as an opportunity to get training and experience to maybe do a career transition to something else.
Volunteering is how you get other jobs.
It is.
Right?
It is.
You've seen that, right?
I mean, innumerable people who volunteered in our program ended up having really very wonderful careers with the county, or used it to get jobs other places. So now, what do we have in Marin? We have a lot of retired people.
Yes.
And so the demographics have moved from reentry women, career changers, to now we have quite a few older volunteers.
Right.
And so the county has been really richly blessed to have such a breadth and depth of experience and skills and talent. And basically, anything that the county could do, we've had volunteers basically helping or doing it, and always with the idea that we were in support of the paid staff.
Right.
The program was absolutely not to replace paid staff, but to augment. So we were able to increase services, we were able to add services that we wouldn't otherwise have through the volunteer effort.
But I think your expertise, well, what you did, what you started as a young mom, is what helped you put that together. Because you're right, you can't just have volunteers. It has to be a program. You have to feel like you're accountable.
Yes.
And it's still going on, right? How many volunteers do you know that work at the county?
I retired 2 years ago, and we had, I think, 8,500 volunteers, and we'd done about $10.9 million worth of services.
Right, that was the number I was, that's great.
Yeah.
That is just fabulous. Hey, Marin County's like that. I think volunteers what really make our county as wonderful as it is. So you're highlighted by everybody in that role, Joan. I mean, everybody has talked about you and will forever. And I'm going to talk about you more now that I know this. So I just want to know, and you sort of answered this, but why do you think volunteering is important to individuals in the community? I'd like you to sort of wrap that part out.
Oh,
I know you can.
My experience is that people often volunteer when they're at transition points in their lives. So like when I walked into Barbara Boxer's office, I was new in the community, or, kids go off to college and someone is empty nested, or, whatever, or they're passionate about a cause.
Right.
Yeah. And so my experience is that one of the best ways to really be happy in your life is to be able to feel productive and make a difference in someone else's life. And often that involves being part of a team, learning new skills or contributing your skills, making connections. And I know that the days that I had a terrific team of volunteers who worked in my own office. And when they were there, my energy was higher, and they loved being there. We absolutely loved having them there. So it feeds off of one another.
It does, actually. It's the answer to a happy life,
without
a doubt. And can you tell of a couple experiences you can think of with some of your volunteers that went on to something bigger and better, and really it happened through volunteering? Maybe just a couple circumstances.
Ooh. There are so many.
I know, hard to choose.
One that's kind of dramatic. We had a job coach program which I started, and this was a program where I recruited volunteers to work individually with people with serious persistent mental illness. And I had interviewed someone who had been referred to me one time by Community Mental Health, and he had quit his paid job as a parking lot attendant. And so they weren't so sure that he would be that dependable. And I said to him, you know, I really need someone who can absolutely commit for 3 months that this will be their priority. And I understand that you didn't stick with your parking lot job, and can you talk to me about that? And he looked at me and he said, Joan, I didn't want to be a parking lot attendant. And I said, I wouldn't want to be a parking lot attendant either. And it gave, I mean, it was like one of those, you know, aha moments. Yes. Where I realized that, you know, we really, you know, a mental illness is a part of a person, but people who have mental illnesses also can have tremendous other kinds of skills. And so we would pair a volunteer with that person on the job site to help them maybe with the social things or the things that would create pressure. But we had a whole raft of people for a 10-year period who made important, significant contributions to the county, and also enjoyed much better physical and mental health for their involvement.
That is the best example you could have given. I mean, because I know that's true. I've seen that in some work I've done. So, Joan, this has really been wonderful talking to you, and everything you say registers. I believe everything you say, but most importantly, I see why you were so successful, because I didn't realize how you had fought the government when you were a young person and how you had helped to get Barbara Boxer as a supervisor. All of that is fabulous, and we thank you for that. So thank you for sharing your incredible life with us.
Thank you, Joan.
And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. The Marin Women's Hall of Fame is a project of the YWCA of San Francisco and Marin. If you would like to learn more about the Hall of Fame and our honorees, please visit www.ywcasf-marin.org. Thank you. That was so good, Joan.
Thank you.
Just loved it.